Greetings. This is the Georgia School of Preaching. My name is Mike Underwood, and we are in the study of the book of Psalms and Song of Solomon. And I believe this is week 10. I always tell you I'm going to check that before I say it, and I never do. I believe this is week 10. The lesson today will be divided into three parts. The first part we'll be doing now, then we'll cease this video, and then I will start another video about a different song, and then the third video will be as we did last time, only I made it one recording. I'm going to record the audio of the Song of Solomon lesson from the guy out in Texas whose name escapes me at this point. And as I said, or as has probably been the case, you can go to his website and view it or listen to it there. You'll probably get a better sound there, but I'm just putting it down here just so it's here and so that I have given that to you. Luke, since it's just me and you, I'll go ahead and say this. Your final exam is going to be the sermon that you're going to prepare for me, for the class, a sermon on one of the songs of your choosing, or if it's a song or a sermon lesson that does more than once. However you're going to do that. And we'll work out that time when you get that done as to when you will present that to me. It needs to be done only before the day of the final exam. And I'm not going to be giving you the weekly quizzes. I haven't given you the last two or three simply because I haven't actually gotten around to it. That's my fault, not yours. And therefore, I'm not going to send them late to you and make you have to double up on your work. So you'll not be getting the weekly quizzes from here. So your final grade will consist of the weekly quizzes you've done thus far, your midterm exam, and your sermon that you're going to present, and the memory work that I required of you at the beginning of the class, and your report, don't call it reports anymore, the paper that you're doing on the different types of psalms types of wisdom literature, different types of psalms, for the purpose of the psalms, the didactic and so forth. So that's what we're looking at there. And that's just, again, me and you, because it's only me and you. Went ahead and said if we had a broader class, I don't know what I'd do differently there, but just letting you be informed. So today will be three different videos. This will be the first of it. And the links, of course, I've already found. So you're actually viewing this because you've already found it. So I was doing some reading this week concerning the Psalms, and I went to a preacher that I had used before a long time ago and hadn't actually seen any of his work of lately. Preacher, author, I think I don't know if he's a scholar by PhD at the end of his name or whatever at the end of his name. I think he's scholarly in his approach to the Bible and have learned much at his feet through his teaching over the years. And so I respect him, and I go back to him from time to time over the years, and he's done some really good work in a lot of areas, and I saw that he had done some work on the Psalms, so I went to him to get his perspective on the Psalms, just to add to what I've already gained in our studies this semester and before, to get his ideas, get his thoughts on the Psalms. And I wanted to get his perspective because he is a man who doesn't always follow the path that others have left before him. A lot of times people say that they'll break out a commentary, the commentary says this, and therefore that's what it is. And a lot of times a particular group, a Church of Christ group, or this kind of group or that kind of group, they'll have a particular slant on a particular passage or a thought, and they'll just take that slant because it's what's required of them, because they're of that particular group. Well, he's not like that. He doesn't do that. He makes his own path. It may end up being the same path that the group that he might be typically qualified or put in would take, but he goes to a path that he's made for himself. He works things out for himself, and I respect that and actually encourage that in young students and even myself to work things out. Don't just take the path that's of least resistance. Don't just take the path that's laid out for you by your teachers. Don't just be a parrot in what you're teaching. Make it your own. It's when we figure out things for ourselves. I told my kids this growing up, and it hasn't always been the greatest results, but at any rate, when you work out things for yourselves, concerning faith, is what we're talking about. When you work out things for yourself, it becomes your faith, not someone else's. It's not Mike Underwood's faith. It's not the Memphis School of Preaching's faith. It's not this college's faith. It's your faith because you worked it out for yourself. I'm not encouraging taking a different road just for the sake of taking a different road. I'm encouraging you to make the road that you're on your road, a road that you have come to the conclusion that it's the right road because you have done the examination of it yourself. Obviously, we are to be taught. We are to have teachers and we are to be taught. Paul told Timothy that take the things that I have taught you and you teach them to others who will then take it and teach to others. And we have, as a result, 2,000 years later, have the teachings of the Holy Spirit through the Apostle Paul. So the precedent is there, obviously, for learning, teaching, and learning. But Paul didn't expect Timothy and subsequent learners from Timothy to accept unsubstantiated or unsubstantiatable, I know that's not a word, teachings. In fact, Paul and John both taught that we ought to prove the things that are taught and accept only that which is good. My point here is that the author of which I'm speaking usually does a really good job of that. I won't give you his name because on this particular thought that we're going to be discussing, I think he missed it personally, and maybe you think I've missed it, and that's okay. His error, as I perceive his error, I don't think it's a damnable heresy that he's proposing, and so I don't think there's any reason in marking him for that at all. It doesn't even come close to that. It's just a mistaken opinion or viewpoint, or at least one that's other than mine, and I wanted to point that out. So having said that, let me back up a little bit and encourage you to judge for yourself as I read his comments. Maybe I'm the one mistaken. Maybe he's the one mistaken. Maybe we're both mistaken. Maybe you can come to a better conclusion than either one of us. As we go through this, if you don't agree with me, then don't write me off as some kind of nutcase, or don't pigeonhole me into some liberal or ultra-conservative or conservative camp. That don't do that to people. Just realize that all of us are people. All of us make mistakes, and all of us are not going to agree with you or with each other on certain things. Just attribute it to the fact that I'm ignorant and unlearned, and move on. As concerns the things that we're talking about on this particular subject, or any subject for that matter. If you see that I'm wrong, just do me a favor sometime and say, hey, I think you missed it right here, and I think on your test, your midterm test, you noted a couple of times that you didn't agree with the teacher. That's great, fine. Don't agree with me, and show me why you don't agree with me, and you probably are not going to always convince me to change, but there might be a possibility that I missed it, and you can show me that. I truly understand that I have not gotten it all, and I am still a student of God's Word and still searching and making that path. Hopefully it's the path that God has provided for us through Jesus Christ. Let me read to you this brother's comments, and I will interject in between occasionally in his comments, and I'll make the distinction between his comments and mine. He says, the Psalms are Hebrew poetry, not Hebrew prose. Anyone who wishes to do a deep study of the meaning of some of the Psalms will need basic understanding of Hebrew poetry. We talked about that as we discussed the Psalms in the introduction. That's really the basics of this lesson, of this course, is if we can get that introductory part down and understand that Psalms are a different kind of material, and we need to understand that going into the Psalms, that it's not the same thing as reading Romans or Hebrews or whatever. Anyway, he said Uh, Anyone who wishes to do a deep study of the meaning of some of the Psalms will need a basic understanding of Hebrew poetry. A psalm, he says, does not mean what we as Christians want it to mean, but what the psalmist meant when he wrote the psalm. Before going any further, I want to, for clarity's sake, say I agree with that statement. I'm not contradicting or going against that statement. You'll see what I mean later on as we go into it. But he says a psalm does not mean what we Christians want it to mean, but it means what the psalmist who wrote it meant for it to mean. And I agree with that statement. He goes on to say the Psalms are focused on righteousness in Israel before Jesus, not righteousness today after centuries of Christian focus. What he seems to imply in that statement, or what I infer from that statement, is where I begin to find my difficulty in what he's going to say. Like I said, I agree with his statement that the psalm means what the author of the psalm, or what the Holy Spirit actually meant for the psalm to say, not what I might impose upon that psalm 2,000 years or 4,000 years later. But then he goes on to say the Psalms are focused on righteousness in Israel before Jesus, not righteousness today after centuries of Christian focus. Yeah, that's where I begin to see the rub. He goes on to say, a person seeks to be righteous as a response to God's behavior. Therefore, a person does what is proper in observing God's values because of who God is and what God does. Righteousness is not based on the behavior of people, but upon the behavior of God. The attitude of the Psalms toward enemies is not the attitude endorsed by those who follow Jesus Christ. Let me interrupt you. That statement, I'll read it again. The attitude of the Psalms toward enemies is not the attitude endorsed by those who follow Jesus Christ. To me, that statement is the essence of this whole point that he's going to be trying to make in this writing that he does, and it is the thing that kind of hard to say without explaining it all, but I have to get to it piece by piece. It's the thing that begins to rub me wrong, or does rub me wrong. He says part of the reason for the Psalm's attitude, the attitude that is the psalmist's attitude, is to be found in the deterioration of people. He says from creation until the entrance of evil into creation, people's lives were sinless. When from the time God created to the time Adam and Eve sinned, they were sinless. When creation was complete, God was pleased. He said all was good. Genesis 1:31. After evil entered God's creation, the time came when people were completely corrupt, and God was sorry he created. Thus, people went from no sin to complete sin. The process of recovery from complete sin, he says, was slow. It involved much divine toleration. This is not necessarily the subject that I want to pursue, though it's not completely unrelated. But let me interrupt here and say that I struggle a bit with that thought. I agree with to agree, and then when I begin to think and process that thought that it involved that the process of recovery from complete sin was slow. It involved much divine toleration. It gives me pause. It gives me. I struggle with that thought. I won't say it's wrong, only that I struggle with it from the perspective that God is holy and cannot be otherwise than holy and continue to be God, and thus he cannot, and I think a primary biblical teaching, Old Testament, New Testament, he cannot be in fellowship with that which is sin. I mean, that to me is the dominant statement behind the book of Leviticus. He cannot be in fellowship with sin. Don't do that. Why? Because you are my people and I am God. I am holy. I am just. Don't do that. Why? Because I am God. You belong to me. That which belongs to me can't be unholy. You find that statement not in those words, but that statement over and over again in the book of Leviticus. So God is holy, he cannot be otherwise, and he cannot be in fellowship with that which is unholy, or that which is in fellowship with sin. On the other hand, as I read the scriptures, the Old Testament scriptures, and I see some of the actions that are done by some of the Old Testament greats, some of the actions that are considered sinful by New Testament standards, and they are involved in or being done by men in the Old Testament who are considered among the worthies and considered as great men of faith in the New Testament writings, I begin to scratch my head and wonder, what do we do here? Is this a matter of God's being tolerant of evil? It is my pattern when I stumble upon those to leave such matters that I don't understand in the hands of a just and all-knowing God. When it appears that God is approving, or at least not disapproving, he doesn't give any statement of disapproval to an action done by a man who is considered a righteous man by New Testament standards, or at least by New Testament words, it gives me difficulty. I have problems with that, and it causes me to not struggle with my faith, but at least struggle in if there's a person out there who does not believe in God, does not want to believe in God because God said don't do this, and yet this guy did that, and yet God says this is one of the great men of faith. How do you answer that? It's a difficult question. It's one that has to be, at least for me, wrestled with. The author continues with a question. He says, how do righteous people endure affliction when evil people cause the righteous affliction, and they, that is the righteous sufferers, I think, how do righteous people endure affliction when evil people cause the righteous affliction, and they do not know or do not have the promise God made through Jesus? He says many Psalms deal with the anxiety caused by suffering. I want to stop there for a moment. I'm not sure that the righteous sufferers, that is, the people who are suffering, who are righteous, and they're suffering because of righteousness. I'm not sure that the righteous sufferers of the Old Testament were not acquainted with God's promises of faithfulness to them. It seems to me, he says, they did not know. Well, he says the righteous do not know, or who are suffering at the hands of evil. He said they do not have or do not know the promises made through Jesus. Moses, over and over, spoke of God's promise to be with and to reward Israel's fidelity when they entered into the land. If you'll be faithful, God will do this. God's going to be faithful to you. He's going to give you his presence, or his presence is going to be with you. He's going to give you his protection. Yes or no, it wasn't from the words of Jesus in the New Testament, but nonetheless, Moses understood that God is going to be faithful to those who are faithful. I think all the Old Testament believers understood that. Even Abraham in the beginning of his faith understood that. That's why he left Ur the Chaldees. I don't think it was implied that their faithfulness would be without struggle. God doesn't work in that way today, and I don't guess, I suppose that he worked that way back then. They understood that if they chose to be faithful, or at least they came to understand that if they chose to be faithful, it would oftentimes involve struggle. There are people in the world aren't going to like your fidelity or your faithfulness to God. They're going to cause you at least unrest or discomfort. Job, he asked the question, why have you forsaken me, essentially? He didn't know what had happened in the situation. His question wasn't so much challenging God's faithfulness. It was more, or to me at least, I understand that because God, he didn't perceive that God was with him. Something happened to the relationship. He didn't perceive that God was with him during this horrible time. What are you doing to me? What have I done? Type of thing, or at least that's the question that was placed there by his so-called friends. And Job didn't understand the situation correctly or fully because he didn't know what's happening on the other side of the veil that he can't see. And God, in the end, told him, who are you to ask me this question? I'm doing this. This is my world. I'm running it like it needs to be run. And who are you? Type of questions. It's not exactly how God put it, by the way. But Job understood in his mind, anyway, that there was a change from God's fidelity to him in the past to what God was doing with him now. He felt like God was somehow being unfaithful to him. Maybe that's not the right word to put in Job's mouth, but he knew that there was a change in what the relationship was and what the relationship is during this time of severe persecution, and he didn't understand that. But my point is, he had experienced God's fidelity. He knew of God's fidelity and expected God's fidelity to him when Job himself was faithful. He was confused when a time came when he was being faithful, and he perceived, or is perceived in his own mind, that God wasn't being faithful to him. So that, to me, is evidence that what he says here is not exactly accurate. That the Jews, or the Old Testament faithful, the Old Testament righteous, were not aware of promises of God, true, made through Jesus, but they still were aware of promises of fidelity from God. Let me continue and see if I can clear up the mess that I made. He says, the great temptation of Christians is to superimpose Christian values or views on a psalm. I agree with that. When such occurs, the message of the psalm is compromised or destroyed. The psalm does not need to be explained away through this approach. There is a vast difference in making an application of something written and ascribing to the writing a primary meaning. And I would not disagree with the statement there. He says the righteous will face suffering because they dare to endorse righteous conduct. However, the righteous will never be abandoned by God. Trust in God does not depend upon favorable circumstances. So I don't disagree with all that he says here. I think there's a lot of good in what the gentleman, the brother, is saying here. And it might be that my difficulty with some of the things that he did say is because of my own lack of understanding of what he was trying to say, or my misunderstanding of what he says. My difficulty is in the idea that Christian values are different than the values that God expected of the Jews in the Old Testament. I think Jesus speaks to this very thing in the Sermon on the Mount. He said in Matthew 5, verse 20, I say to you that unless your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. Well, the righteousness of the Pharisees or scribes and Pharisees is not, in my opinion, the same as the righteousness that was prescribed in the law, the righteousness of which Moses spoke. They had the scribes and the Pharisees had superimposed their own definitions of righteousness upon the law. They had the law, they had the commandments of the law, and then they put this great big fence around the law to protect the law. But the fence around the law that they placed was their form of righteousness and not God's. God's righteousness is that was commanded in the old law is in the law, not in the fence that was placed around the law by the Pharisees and the scribes. The law, for example, said in Exodus chapter 20, verse 8, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. That's the law. He explains, 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall do no work. You, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your cattle, your stranger, who is within your gates. Do no work. That's the law. For in 6 days, here's a little bit of an explanation. For in 6 days God made the heavens and the earth and the sea and all that's in them, and rested on the Sabbath day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. So the law is, do no work. Remember the Sabbath day, keep it holy. What does it mean? Do no work is the thing that's repeated often in the context. The Pharisees, in order to protect this law of God, do no work, they built this huge fence around the road. But they wrote volumes of laws about what it means not to violate the Sabbath law, not to violate the Sabbath day. The Jewish scholars, from what I understand, created 39 different categories of what work means. And within those 39 categories are thousands, maybe, of subcategories that you can't do. So to follow the rule of not working on the Sabbath day, there would be thousands of sub rules that you had to read and be knowledgeable of in order to meet the standard of Pharisaical righteousness or scribal righteousness. Jesus further stated in Matthew 5, verse 21, you have heard that it was said of those to those of old, you shall not murder, and whoever murders will be in danger of the judgment. In Matthew 5, verse 27, he goes on to say, you have heard that it was said of those to those of old, you shall not commit adultery. And then in verse 33, again, you have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform your oaths to the Lord. The Pharisees seem to, in this case of these three laws, they seem to have done the opposite of what they did with the Sabbath law. In the case of do not kill or do not commit adultery or do not swear falsely, they took a literal approach that it didn't say I can't do this, it didn't say I can't do this, it didn't say I can't do this. So they made exceptions, I suppose, to excuse their own wickedness, their own sinful, uncircumcised hearts, their own sinful actions. They had a thing or a way of life that they wanted to do, and they tried to manipulate the law to justify or make themselves look justified. It's easy for a person not to be in sin when they reconstruct the law as to keep the actions that they're doing not a part of the law, to eliminate their actions from being controlled by the law. In the Sermon on the Mount, I believe Jesus is teaching us that the intent and the understanding of the law was that murder was not to be conceived in the heart. Do not murder. It's not saying, well, you can do everything but murder the guy. You can beat the guy to a pulp, just don't murder the guy. The law never condoned that kind of interpretation or that kind of activity. The law doesn't condone, just because it doesn't say the words, thou shalt not hate, it didn't condone hatred. And I think that's what Jesus is trying to explain there in the law. And the Pharisee says, as long as I don't kill him, I can do whatever. And Jesus says, that's not what the law meant. I don't know that Jesus is so much saying, I'm giving you a new law. I think he's actually giving us the proper interpretation of what the law meant in the time that Moses gave it. Same thing with the act of adultery. God never said you can not commit the act of adultery, but you can assure lust and long after her like you wanted to. No, that's not what God intended to say in the law of Moses. I don't think it's what God said in the law of Moses. And I think Jesus is trying to teach that you can do whatever you want to as long as you don't commit the act itself. The Pharisees and their forefathers interpreted the law in a way that suited them. Jesus never says that was never the intent of the law. And I guess the point I'm trying to make is that God did not have one standard for the Jew or the Jews of the Old Testament and one for the Christian. Jesus is not saying, well, this is what it was for them back there, but here's what it is for you. I think in both cases, righteousness can only be attained through the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. The righteousness that was required by the law could not or was not obtained by them because they failed to keep the law. They were not able to be faithful to the law at all times, and so they need the righteousness of another to cover their own inabilities or unrighteousness. And I think that's true of the New Testament as well, the Christian as well. We can't make it on our own. If we were to take take all the laws of the New Testament and write them down and try to keep them, we'd find that we would fall short of the glory of God, and we would need the righteousness of another, the one whom God sent to be our righteousness, the one through whom God can look at us and still be holy, or have fellowship with us and still be holy. The author, going back to what the author was saying, the author speaks of the great temptation of Christians to superimpose Christian values or views on a song. And maybe the answer in his statement is when he says there is a vast difference in making an application of something written and ascribing to the writing a primary meaning. At first reading of this whole article that he wrote, and there was more, but this was sufficient to get the point, I think. At first reading, I felt the author was saying that how God expected David to feel about the enemies of God, and how God expects Christians to feel about the enemies of God, are two different animals. David is excused for hating the enemy. David is excused for calling God's wrath down upon the enemies, to ask him to break their teeth or break their jaw, whatever it is that David asked God to do. In the New Testament, he says, or he's saying, I think he teaches that Christians have a different standard, given a different standard as to how they are to feel about the enemies of God. And if that's what he's saying, I may have misunderstood what he said, but if that's what he's saying, I don't agree with what he's saying. It is true that God told David and others in Old Testament times to utterly destroy the enemies on several occasions, several different people. And we as Christians do not have that command. God never said, Mike, I want you to go to Saudi Arabia and utterly destroy man, woman, and child, all of those who are of that particular belief or belief of that particular region. So obviously, in that sense, yes, there is a big difference. But in my opinion, the evil and the darkness that is represented by the enemies of God is the thing that is to be loathed by any follower of God, Old Testament or New Testament. It is my prayer, as I think it was David's prayer, that God's wrath, God's judgment be poured out on evil, and that evil, darkness, be utterly destroyed. That's my prayer. And I know that in the end, eventually, that's going to happen. That's going to happen on that great and notable day that God comes again and the Lord returns. On that great and noble day, the wrath of God will be poured out upon evil, upon darkness. God will have victory over evil. To my understanding, there will be no remorse on the part of God at that time, nor will there be any remorse on the part of the saints. For those who are being destroyed, there will be no remorse on the part of the saints or on the part of God. The remorse is over the fact that man sinned. The remorse that we see, the grief that we see in Genesis chapter 6, for example, is over the fact that men had sinned. Men had destroyed the relationship with God that God wanted them to have or wanted them to be in. They had utterly become corrupt. They had utterly become evil. Their thoughts of their intents were evil continually, and God was angry over that and grieved over the loss that those men will experience because of the choices that they made in the face of Satan's deception. God, in his mercy and his goodness and his grace and his long suffering, he offered man a way out of darkness. I think he did so in the time of Noah. Noah spent so many years preaching the righteousness of God, preaching that they should come to the ark. God offered them a way. They thumbed their nose at it. I think he did so in the times of the patriarchs. I think Melchizedek is an example of that. And Abraham became an example of that. I think he did so in the time of Moses. Jesus' sacrifice, the sacrifice that Jesus made, has always been the way of escape, whether it be in type or in reality. But it's always the way of escape, the way of being in fellowship with God, has always been a reality. Whether it had been in type or it's always been provided, whether it be in type, through the ark, through the animal sacrifices, or in the reality, the fulfillment of those types or sacrifices. Because God, at such great sacrifice, has provided or did provide and has provided the way, those who chose and those who choose not to know that way, those who chose or those who choose not to be a part of that way, they will be sent to a devil's hell where the presence of God is not, and where God does not hear their cry. Throughout the Old Testament, I love it when I read that passage with those statements that God heard their cry, but there's coming a time that God will not hear their cry. He will not be present in that place. There will be no presence of God in the devil's hell. Maybe I stray. But I guess my point is this. I am not to hate the people who are lost in sin. Their judgment will be given them by God if they are impenitent, do not turn and find the way that God has provided so sacrificially for them. David cries of vengeance, or his cries of vengeance upon them are no different, I think anyway, than that of the souls who are under the altar in the book of Revelation chapter 6, where it says, where they say, "How long, O Lord, how long, holy and true, one until you judge and avenge our blood on those who dwell upon the earth." That's New Testament asking for the wrath of God to be upon those who are evil, those who are against the people and the purpose of God. The Holy Spirit expects, I think, those who have been made holy to have a holy hatred of evil, to have a holy hatred of the works of darkness. And it's my prayer in the present that God will, by his sovereignty and or by his providence, that he will bring down wrath and judgment on the evil works of men who blaspheme the name and the purpose of God, giving them yet another opportunity to repent, or if not, failing that, to wipe them from the face of the earth, so that others who might be influenced by their blasphemies and their hatredness of the purpose of God might see the light. It is not my command to be the instrument of God's vengeance, as sometimes it was David's command. God commanded him to be the instrument of vengeance, or Israel's command to be the instrument of God's judgment or vengeance on particular occasions. But having said that, I don't think it's improper for me to sing or pray that God will, in accordance with his divine purpose, destroy the works of evil by whatever means he deems right to so do. And I realize that my prayer, my song is it's ultimately the divine prerogative that must be bowed to, or must be it must be what suits the divine purpose, the ultimate divine purpose, the end game of God, that God does a particular thing. But it's not wrong for me to ask God for a blessing that I might be able to be more effective in that divine purpose, or to ask God for a curse upon this particular event or thing or theology or lack of theology is satanicness of the world, so that people in darkness who are being influenced that might see that it's not wrong for me to ask God to intervene in some way to destroy that, to bring judgment upon that, not to suit my purposes, but to suit his purposes. His purpose is the one that must be and will be suited. But I think the New Testament teaches us, and the Old Testament as well, and David does this from time to time, and other psalmists do from time to time, to ask God to intervene and do this act of judgment upon that which is wicked. Nor do I think it's inappropriate for me to, or the saints of God, to rejoice when God has so answered that prayer by some judgment upon the sinner. And I don't think it would be wise or prudent or even right to get in a parade and go wave flags and cheer and taunt the evil who have been destroyed or incapacitated or whatever, those evil who are in the grasp of God when God demonstrates his judgment in this world in our time. Not the final judgment, but the judgment that he brings upon the world from time to time in various ways and places. I don't think it's wrong for me to rejoice that God has had victory in that situation, or God has demonstrated victory in that situation. I think Miriam and Moses on the banks or the shores of the Red Sea, they sang a song of victory and praise to God. You have overcome them. You have thrown the rider into the sea. But I don't think they went down through the streets of Memphis and Thebes with that song, taunting the Egyptian survivors. I don't think that's appropriate in any way. But I think it's okay for us to, in our assemblies, rejoice when there's been victory. To sing songs of rejoicing when there has been victory, or pray prayers of thanksgiving when there has been victory. Let me ask you to turn with me to Psalm 3. As an example of, I guess, what I'm trying to say, what I'm trying to say today. Turn with me to Psalm 3, third Psalm. Lord, how they have increased who trouble me. Many are they who rise up against me. Many are they who say of me, there is no help for him in God. But you, O Lord, you are a shield for me, my glory, and the one who lifts up my head. I cried to the Lord with my voice, and he heard me from his holy hill. I laid down and slept. I awoke, for the Lord sustained me. I was afraid of 10,000s of people who have set themselves against me, or I will not be afraid of 10,000s of people who have set themselves against me all around. Why? Because the Lord is my shield. The Lord is my glory who lifts up my head, and I know that he answers or hears from my holy hill, or his holy hill. Verse 7, arise, O Lord, save me, O my God, for you have struck all my enemies on the cheekbone. You have broken the teeth of the ungodly. Salvation belongs to the Lord. Your blessing is upon your people. The predominant thought in this song, or about this song, is that it was written about the time when David's son, Absalom, rebelled against David's throne, and the victory that came to David at the end of that. The song begins indicating that David might have actually been surprised at the turn of events. Absalom had stolen the hearts of the people. We can see this story in 2 Samuel chapter 15 through 18. Absalom had stolen the hearts of the people, and David, I think the text indicates from the book of 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, David was not unaware of what Absalom was doing. What Absalom did, he didn't do in a vacuum. He he did there in the gates of the city, or outside the gates of the city, at the gates of the city. It wasn't something that David would not have been aware of, and David, I think, unwisely, in protection of his son, maybe he allowed that to take place, but maybe things escalated more quickly than David anticipated, or Absalom's success was greater than David expected. And according to what we read in 2 Samuel, David had to quickly escape from the city of Jerusalem to keep from being killed or captured, at least. Indication of verses 1 and 2 of the psalm here is that David's enemies were mocking David because your God has deserted you. Maybe the enemies had interpreted the punishment that God had given David, the sword shall not depart from your household. Maybe they interpreted that as a sign that God had and would and should desert David, and David had nothing upon which to lean. But in verses 3 through 6, David asserts his great trust in God. They say, I don't have a God to depend upon, that you've deserted me, that you're no longer a part of my life, but I have great trust in you. Yes, I have sinned, and yes, there are severe and terrible consequences in my life, and will be terrible consequences in my life from now till I die because of the sin that I chose to involve myself in. But that doesn't make me think that God has deserted me or that God doesn't love me. Nathan came to me and told me what I did was wrong, or what I did was wrong. And that is evidence enough to me that you love me. You wouldn't have sent Nathan to do that just to rub my nose in it. You wanted me to repent. God wanted him to repent. David saw these things as signs that God had not deserted him. And the events that took place in David's life between Bathsheba and Absalom were things that would have indicated to David that he has not been totally forsaken. That yes, there is trouble in David's life. There are difficulties in David's life, but David did that. When you go out and put on a drunk, get involved in an accident, your arm's cut off in the accident, if you repent of that sin, it doesn't mean that you're going to grow a new arm. You're going to suffer with the lack of that arm for the rest of your life. The consequence is there. It doesn't mean God doesn't love you and that God's not going to do something to restore you to him, to bring you back to him. So David, in negation of the mocking of verses 1 and 2, that they said, you don't have a God to depend upon, he said, yes, I do. He is my shield. He is my glory who lifts up my head. You people are putting me in a hole, but God lifts up my head. I depend upon God. I think he sings this in the taunting, in the eyes of the taunting, the tauntingness of his enemy. Concerning verses 7 and 8, there's some discussion among scholars as to who actually wrote that particular part of the psalm. Did David write it, or was it the addition of a later editor in his own circumstance? And many people believe that editor was Hezekiah. I'm not sparing the details at this point anyway, but I think there's good reason to accept that Hezekiah sang this song of David's and likely did add the ending of the psalm in regard to what God did in the work, his quick work of salvation in the night that he destroyed the 185,000 enemy soldiers of the Assyrian army that spread against Jerusalem. Can we sing this song today? This is the question that came to my mind as I read the brother's remarks that we referred to earlier. Can we sing this song today? And my humble opinion is that not only can we, but we should. Sure enough, we need to make the changes necessary to adapt it to our own culture, our own situation. But I think, yes, we can sing what this song says today. Nothing has changed about the fact that God's people have enemies in this world. Sometimes the enemies are troubles that we have are like David's. They're brought upon us by our own foolishness, by our own sinfulness. Sometimes the enemies or the troubles that we have arise out of the world's hatred for God, the world's hatred for the light that he or his people bring into their dark world. And that's where we have many of our struggles. In either case, whether it's because of our own foolishness or because of the world's hatred of God, we have struggles. We have troubles, just like David did, and we can trust in and sing about the faithfulness of God. David did, and I think we can too. He can deliver. He will deliver. Yea, he has delivered. As I have tried to impress throughout the course of this study of Psalms, try to remember that the Psalms were songs sung in the temple, written to be sung in the temple or in worship to God, not just by the author who penned the words by inspiration, but by peoples who would for thousands of years, in times of their own struggles, in times of their own pain, that is described in a particular psalm, they would sing those same songs. The songs are intended to encourage. The songs are intended to provoke stronger faith or deeper faith in the God who delivers. We should know that God is on the side of the righteous. We should sing that God is on the side of the righteous. We should sing that God is against that which is evil. And no matter how dark our times of persecution may be, don't forget, as Peter so eloquently stated in the first letter of Peter, he says, don't forget, God is worthy of praise. God is worthy of being, look it up in the Greek, 1 Peter chapter 1, but worthy of being eulogized, of having good words said about him. God, or blessed be God, he says. Good words should be said about God, Peter says, even though you're going through a severe time of persecution, even though it's a fiery trial, even though they might be putting people that you love in jail or upon crosses, even though the most horrendous circumstances are taking place around you, God is worthy to be praised. God is to be blessed by your mouth, by the words of your mouth. He will protect. If not in the present fire, then in the eternal future. Salvation belongs to the Lord. Your blessings, O Lord, be upon your people. I thank you for your attention. This is the end of lesson 1 for today, and I will come back in Two Shapes of a Lamb's Tail and continue our lesson with a different, continue the hour with a different song. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording here rather than pause it and continue it. Just have two different recordings, actually be three because of the recording of the recording. We want to do it at the end, but let me go ahead and pause it, or not pause it, but in this video, I'll send you this link and another presentation. As soon as I can figure out how to do that. Stop the video, that's the one. And meeting. That was the one.